Hello and welcome to the Adventures in Arting podcast. My name is Julie Fei-Fan Balzer, and I am a working artist and mother to a curious toddler. My business, Balzer Designs, is all about helping you to live an artful life through thoughtful art education. On this podcast, together with my super special co-host and my mom, Eileen Hsü-Balzer, we ask questions of each other and our guests while discussing learning, the creative career path, finding balance, looking at art, setting goals, and why being creative matters. Our goal for this podcast is to stimulate your imagination. So, hi, Mom.
Hello, Julie.
So, we're back in the saddle again in the studio. We're here together. You have had a lot of construction going on at your house. It's a big art project.
It is a big art project. It started out because a car drove through my porch, and then as they opened it up, there was more and more rot under the porch. And
as always happens with an old house,
there was a fence that needed attention. And before you know it, this one project has morphed into a gigantic,
it's a ball rolling down a hill,
encompassing thing. And I simply braced myself for the endless onslaught of change orders. And because it's a big porch on a Victorian house, you can't sort of do part of it because the whole porch is connected. So this is my project. I'm sorry, Julie, but I have no time for you anymore because I have to sit there and look through my window at this.
Yeah, it's a big project. And I think this happens. I mean, everybody who's renovated a house know how things snowballs and it just changes. And you uncover one thing and suddenly everything's rotten underneath. Right. This has happened to me multiple times. But I think, art projects are like that too, where you think you have an idea and you're going somewhere and then you suddenly realize that it's somewhere else you're supposed to be, or you're in the middle of, making something and things change. And so that actually brings us back to our topic today, which is really about keeping a sketchbook and why that's an important practice. And I think the biggest key, I'll give you the bit of advice at the beginning of the podcast today, instead of making you wait till the end. But the biggest thing I hope you take away is going to be the idea that if you want to get better at art, which I don't know why you wouldn't want to get better at art. Everybody wants to get better at art, right? But if you want to get better at it, directed practice is the way to do it. And a sketchbook is a wonderful, essentially free. I mean, I guess you have to pay for the sketchbook unless you make it yourself, but then you did pay for the paper. But you know what I mean? It's essentially a way for you to make yourself get better in a focused way. So I thought we could talk a little bit about directed practice and sort of what that means, as opposed to sort of, I think when people start talking about sketchbooks, the first thing they start talking about is drawing. And drawing can be a thing that pushes people away and makes them sort of uninterested in pursuing it.
Well, because they start comparing what they're drawing to
a photograph
or Michelangelo. Right. What I would say is, since I don't keep a sketchbook, but one thing I might compare it to is recipes, cooking. And some recipes have a lot of technique involved as well as a lot of equipment. And so the first time you try it, it might not come out like the picture. It might not come out the way you expected it. And again, people take notes. They write notes in the margins of the cookbook or the recipe. They alter things to suit their taste. And I think that's a sort of same idea, which is you should get more comfortable and make it work for you personally the more you do it. And if you keep the notes, then you won't keep repeating the same mistakes.
Yeah, I think that a sketchbook can be many things. I mean, let's get that started right there, right? There's the kind of sketchbook that's like a visual diary. There's the kind of sketchbook that's, preparing for a project. There's the kind of sketchbook that's like practicing a particular skill. There are a lot of different kinds of sketchbooks. I think what I'm mainly interested in pursuing right now is something that I call a studio notebook, which I just think is an easier way of thinking of a sketchbook, because then you're not focused on the idea that it's like drawing after Michelangelo, after drawing, but there's more of an acknowledgement that it is what do you do in a notebook? you write things down. You might have lists. There could be a calendar. There's, to-dos. There's sort of like random thoughts. This notebook can also be something that's ugly and maybe has lined paper or something like that. So it doesn't have to be this kind of pristine angels, the sketchbook. And I think all of it gets harmed a million times by seeing on social media people talking about like, oh, I hate all these ugly pages in my sketchbook when I wasn't very good. And then you're looking at these gorgeous, luminous drawing page after page of stuff. And you just think, well, what? Which I think is a reminder to get back to the house renovation of like when people show their houses, their whole house doesn't look like that. That's one corner that they cleaned out for you to look at for 5 seconds with really good lighting. Do you know what I mean? Or any of that stuff. People's real lives aren't like constantly filled with all the perfect moments you see where like for instance, I don't ever post anything where my toddler is like having a tantrum or a meltdown or anything like that, because I don't think that kind of stuff should be on social media. But does he? Yeah, he's a toddler. But if you saw the pictures, you'd think that all he did was like play all day and be pleasant. No, and I think like that's the thing about art too. We generally don't show the things that we really hate because that's really hard to do. Most people just don't want to if you really, really hate it, right?
Sometimes I think about what if there had been social media around when I had little kids, what I would have posted about you.
What would you have posted about us? That we were perfect all the time, angels?
Well, that would have left me with nothing. But I just think it's interesting because from birth, these kids today are used to being photographed. Mm-hmm. And they just have a different idea, I think, of their childhood. They have a lot more pictures to look at and a lot of video to look at.
Well, you and I even discussed generationally between us, and I'm on the cusp of a lot of the technology stuff, but you have an expectation of privacy in your life. And I kind of am like, I have some expectation of privacy, but not a ton. And I think one generation away from me, they're like, what's privacy?
Right.
And I think that's how you grow up. I remember reading an interview with Anne Hathaway, who I think is similarly aged to me. She may be slightly younger, but she said that she was so glad that she had gone to college in the years before there was social media, because she could do all the dumb things she wanted, and people have to break out the film and develop it in a dark room in order for any of it to come to light. And I think that's true. There's a lot of ways in which you can't hide. So to bring it back briefly to an art conversation, there was a person that I interviewed on this podcast, and a stranger who I just approached on the internet and said, hey, do you want to do an interview? And one of the things that she said to me, she said, I researched you. I went back all the way through every single one of your Instagram posts back to the very first one that you posted. Now, to be completely fair, I'm pretty sure I joined Instagram in like 2011. So it is 2022. So that's a decade.
She has too much spare time.
Well, I was like, that's a commitment. You know what I mean? Yeah. But you really do see then where somebody came from. And like, unlike a celebrity, I don't like scrub my social media and stuff, because I think my very first post was of my ex-husband. And I've never taken down any of those posts because they're so buried. Why would anybody? But apparently.
Well, even if they did, I mean,
it's true. It's not like it's not part of my history. And I think that's another thing too, is remembering that people erase things they don't like from their past. In fact, you sent me an article today, didn't you, about how now you're going to be able to untext people?
The new Apple software that'll be available starting Monday will allow you, but you can't erase your text forever. But if you immediately doubt it,
like
there's
you
a little time lag, you can get rid of it.
So you can untext. I think that Gmail has a thing like that where you can, like, if you hit send, but then you had, did something wrong, you can sort of immediately unsend it.
I just think that one of the things, you're right about this expectation of privacy also means that I'm very thoughtful, one might say guarded, about anything I put on.
Yes.
Like Instagram and stuff. And it's my thing is private on purpose. I can't remember the last time I posted anything on Instagram. I
Yeah.
just
And I would say like
feel
I'm more careful now than I would have been. Like if I'd had a kid 10 years ago, I don't think I'd be as careful as I am now about it. You know, I think that we've learned a lot of the ways in which the internet is great and a lot of ways in which it's bad. But I do want to say like what I think a sketchbook is or should be in my mind is it's kind of like that social media history but without any edits. So you're able to look back 10 years and say like, "Oh, this is where I was. These are the thoughts that I was
but
having
you're
at the
using it for
time."
you.
Yeah, I'm using it for me. I mean, I taught a sketchbook class maybe 2 years ago. And one of the questions that I thought was really interesting that someone asked me is she said, I never see any pictures of your sketchbook. Like, why don't you ever share that? Like, how is this a thing that you do since I've never seen any of it? And I was like, hey, it's really interesting that you think I share everything that I do online because I don't.
Or that you should.
Or that I should. But B, like, yeah, that's a very good point. Like, I don't share my sketchbooks very often. I especially don't share the note parts of them. Sometimes I'll share the pictures if I think they're interesting or worth it. Because I think that that's private. Like, that's your brain. That's what you're thinking of right now. That's your moment. I've had this idea to do the sketchbook class for a while, which I've never put together, partially because I'm not sure how I feel about like dragging out the old books because they feel very much like me, like a very personal version of me.
Feels very much like let's all read my diary.
Yeah.
Just because it's some of it is pictures doesn't mean it's not your diary.
Yeah, because it's like my thought process. And I do like the idea of going back because listen, we're all guilty of this. There's an idea that seems terrible at the time, or a drawing that's ugly, or a paint color that you can't stand. And then 3 years later or 3 months later, you look at it and you go, oh, right. And so the thing is, if you're working on like loose papers that you throw away, or you're gessoing over everything to cover it up as you're working, like you're not ever keeping that record of where you've been. And I do think so. I'm working on a new class right now, which is kind of a sketchbook class, I guess. It's called the Carve December Workbook. And one of the videos I was making this afternoon, I was talking a little bit about this idea of when you're doing your test prints and stuff, when you're stamping, I used to have them on these pieces of paper and I would sort of try to keep them, but then they were just kind of like test prints and I would get rid of them. And sometimes I liked the stamp earlier in the carve and I carved too much and I messed it up. And I would just kind of make a mental note, which we know where the mental notes go, into the garbage. I actually heard an interview with Jay-Z on Fresh Air, and he was saying that one of the things is, he said, do you know how many rap songs I've lost by thinking that I just had them in my brain and not, writing them down? And I was like, that's it. That's the thing, which is if you have this brilliant moment, right? It happens to all of us when you're in the shower or laying in bed or a place where there isn't a pen. You know how it feels when you can't remember it later and you're driving yourself crazy because it was the best idea you ever had. So that's, to me, again, what a sketchbook's for. Write that idea down. And even if you don't use it now, you might use it later. So even if you don't use that drawing now, you might use it later. But to get back to the carving, like the way that I find it really useful is I can come back to the design at the point that I liked it and recarve, not based on my feeling of what it was, but by actually feeling what it was, or trying to figure out like why I liked it, or any of that kind of stuff, which sort of gets us back again to the idea of directed practice and what that means. So I'll just ask you, you're the smartest person I know.
That's sad.
Okay, you're the smartest person I know in real life, in person. I mean, I don't think you're the smartest person on the planet, but she's pretty smart. So what does directed practice mean to you?
Let's go back to the recipe thing.
Mm-hmm.
It means getting something, an idea that in your brain that you want to try, but it means not feeling like that the directions in the recipe own you,
Mm-hmm.
and working around something so that it expresses what you want. And the same thing goes with clothing. If you are always dressing according to like what is the latest fashion, too bad for you if you don't have that kind of model's body and that kind of spendable money and the whole thing. I just think all of your life you're faced with making your own choices, and the directed practice is a way of living where you take in lots of input, but you make selections and you get rid of the things that don't work for you, don't interest you, don't appeal to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so you steal some ideas from people, you reject some things from people, and you don't let other people tell you what's right for you.
Mm-hmm.
You let people tell you, oh, that doesn't look like a horse that you drew. Well, maybe to you it feels like you got the essence of horsiness.
Although I did show you my drawing today and tell you it was an orchid, and you said it looked like an iris, and then I read the caption and realized it was an iris. So
yeah, that's a whole
that seems
other
like
problem.
a whole other issue.
That is an entirely
issue.
different problem.
Okay, so I'm going to use a metaphor here, which is if I said to you, tomorrow I am going to do athletics.
Yeah.
You'd be like, okay, right? I don't know what that means, but okay. But if I said to myself, hey, tomorrow I'm going to go for a run, you'd be more like, okay, well, I know what kind of tools and stuff you need for that. But if I said,
and you'll be back in 5 minutes.
Yeah. And if I said to
you need me to pick you up at the end of
the
your
answer
run?
is yes, in the front of the driveway. So if I said to you, in 6 months, I'm going to run a marathon, so I need to start training tomorrow.
I would accept that.
Right. But all of those things, what you see is like athletics is too broad. That's like saying I'm going to make art tomorrow. Right. So you make a smaller plan. I'm going to go for a run. Okay. Well, even you were joking, but it is like, well, how long is that run? Where are you going to run? You know what I mean? But if I tell you I'm training for a marathon in 6 months, that's specific. That's directed. Right. So now I know for the next 6 months, I know what I'm practicing for, which is the event is a marathon. I have to teach myself to run 26 miles. And then I also know that like there are prescribed formulas, like your recipe metaphor, for how to train yourself to run.
Exactly.
That you do this, you do this. I know I can look up equipment. I can look up those things. It's directed instead of just sort of a general idea. It's kind of like, do you make your resolution? I'm going to get healthy. What does that mean? Or do you say like you set yourself a goal? So in art, I think it's the same way. And that's what your studio notebook or your sketchbook is so great for, is you say like, I'm going to paint 10 paintings, a series of 10 paintings, over the next 4 months. Well, what are they going to be about? What is the content going to be? How are they linked in a series? What's the series going to be? That's when you go to the notebook. So you're not working it out across 10 expensive canvases or all of this time and energy and crying into it. You're working out in the pages of an inexpensive notebook. Well, here's what I'm interested in, and here's how I think it should be, and this is what I think it should look like. And you're kind of figuring out, what are my techniques? What are my materials? You're practicing, you're warming up, you're getting your muscles stretched, you're doing the metaphorical art exercises that you would do to get ready for the marathon, which is finally to get ready to paint those 10 paintings. I mean, I think it's like, I've told the story before and I'll tell it again. I have a friend who's a playwright, and her husband always brags that she can write a play in 6 days. And she says, you're a moron. I don't write a play in 6 days. The physical writing time, maybe that I sit down and go, but she said, I've been thinking and planning and working it out for a year. And then I sit down and go, and I think writers have notebooks. Why don't artists have notebooks too, right? If you think about it like that, which is you're getting ready to do your marathon, to write the thing, to do the thing. Do you know what I mean? And so you're doing the exercises, the calisthenics, the race training to get you there. That's what I think directed
I
practice
just sent you a text today, which you probably still haven't read. So there's a new book that was just published by a woman. It's a mystery, a murder mystery. And in it, she imagines that the detective in it is an artist, Georgia O'Keeffe. She's very specific because she has knowledge of Georgia O'Keeffe and New Mexico. And she feels that an artist would look at the situation differently. But what I was interested in, and which is relevant here, is that she keeps all kinds of files. Like she has one whole file that's all crime stuff. So that's in a way, she's keeping notes about things that she might or might not use, but that way she doesn't have to remember them, and she has a place to go. And I think probably people do this about everything. So everything in life is kind of like writing a research thesis, really, because you keep notes. You keep notes about, I used to keep really, this is dumb, but when I was very young and I started to cook for dinner parties, I used to keep these note cards. I still have them somewhere. When I die, you'll find them. And I would keep the note cards, and on it I would put what I had made and who was there, you know.
So that you wouldn't repeat a meal with
Well, exactly, because imagine
the
that.
hostess with the
God,
mostest.
a second spaghetti? No. But the thing is that
this is what happens when you tell a woman with a Harvard education to spend her days cooking.
Bad, right?
Yes.
But I mean, I have a huge notebook where I put, like, in the days when people had business cards, restaurants I liked, or, you know.
Okay, so it doesn't sound weird, because you know what I have in my bullet journal when I used to travel all the time is for cities that I repeatedly went to, like Cleveland, Tampa. I wrote down restaurants I liked and what I liked about them, so that the next time I was looking for a place to eat, I didn't have to remember what it was I had had 3 months ago or where I had gone. I could just look in the list. So,
or I keep like lists of contractors and what they do, so that I could, you know, oh, I need a plumber. Oh, I need tiles. I have some place to start. I mean, I think that's life. If you are a person who doesn't want to hunt around and do things, make the same mistakes over and over, it's very useful to keep notes, and that's directed.
Yeah, that's exactly it. If you don't want to keep making the same mistakes over and over, do directed practice. I mean, I think I can't emphasize that enough. You hit it so succinctly and so perfectly. And that's what a sketchbook does, is it lets you learn from your mistakes. It lets you see where the problems are. It lets you grow.
Right.
Because as I say over and over, if you can identify the mistake or the problem, the opportunity, why you don't like it, why it's a problem, then you can fix it. Right. And so sometimes I find I don't have perspective. Right. Time has become the biggest partner in my art making process as I've gotten older. I've learned
and as you had a child.
Yeah. But I've learned also like how important it is to let time pass in order to digest things, you know? And so I can look at an old notebook and suddenly be excited with new ideas. And it's different from looking at Pinterest, which is exciting and is fun, because instead of being inspired by other people's ideas, I'm inspired by my own ideas. And I love that, like, letting time get in the mix of it, you know, is great. Like, I actually had a funny conversation with Jamie from the Crafters Workshop. She asked me if I wanted to design some layered stencils, which is something I had done in my like first or second release. And she said it was too early. Like, people didn't get them then, but now everybody's making layered stencils. And I was like, that's so funny, because I actually have no interest in doing layered stencils now. It was something I was very interested in then. And everybody was like, what is this? You know? And I just think that like, if I were a smarter business person, it would make sense to revisit that idea.
It would.
But, you know, I think your passions are what your passions are. So who knows? I'll try. I'm going to try to do some layered stencils. We'll see. But again, like, that comes back to,
maybe you'll do it in a different way than I did the first time originally. And that will keep it fresh and interesting, because what I know about you is you love solving problems.
I do.
So you're posing to yourself a problem. How can I do these layered stencils in a way that's new and exciting to me? And I think because of that challenge, you will rise to it.
I hope so. I think that I don't want to do layer stencils like other people are doing them, and I don't want to do them like I did them, so that makes it an interesting problem to solve. And speaking of problems to solve, so my son is 2.
Here's a problem first. I look so small on this screen.
Well, your chair is shorter, is 1, and 2.
I mean, I am shorter, but I do look like,
I mean, it's perspective.
I'm on a different scale as a human being. I'm just saying.
Get closer to the camera.
I'm looking at this screen and I'm thinking,
get closer to. I'm like also much closer to the table. Now, do we look more
better,
like the
but
same?
Still
okay. Brobdingnagian versus Lilliputian.
That's it.
So I can't even remember what I was going to say. It's probably not that important.
You were talking about your 2year-old. I mean, forget your child.
Yeah. My 2-year-old.
Okay, I understand.
My 2-year-old, my almost 3-year-old, I guess. He has been talking a lot about clues. Like, he likes to follow clues, and it could be a clue, right? Like, the other day we saw some tracks on the sidewalk, and I said, oh, a vehicle made these. And he said, vehicles shouldn't be on the sidewalk. And I said, that's true.
So right.
And he said, let's follow them and see where they go. I said, okay. And then he said, maybe it's a clue. And we the conversation petered out when he couldn't say a clue for what. But anyway, I think in the end, he wanted to see the vehicle that had been on the sidewalk. But so I think
that makes sense.
It does.
It's like why you follow animal tracks.
Right? You're interested in seeing it. And if it was a vehicle, he wants to follow it. So I think that a sketchbook is sort of that. It's clues. It's like tracks that you leave for yourself, breadcrumbs that you leave for yourself so that you're not starting over. There's a teacher who told me something that has stayed with me for a couple of years, which is she said, before she leaves the studio every day, she leaves herself a note about exactly what she's thinking, like right at this moment. And then the first thing she does when she comes into the studio the next day is she reads the note from the night before.
A lot of mine would just say hungry.
Well, and it might be a repeat in the morning, but I think what that does for her, she was expressing, is it allows her to like pick up where she left off, because then she doesn't have to noodle it over or think about it when she goes with her family and does whatever, right? Because that time is free, because she knows that her brain has been left in the studio ready to go, and she can just look at it and be like, oh, I wanted to do blah, 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 blah. Or I was thinking about why X doesn't work, or I need to change the paint water, or you know what I mean?
That will work for some. And for other people who need to be in the zone and working for like 5 hours in a row, it might not work.
Yeah.
But I mean,
but it's an idea again about leaving yourself a clue. It's kind of like you're saying about writing in the margin of the recipe, or for Harry Potter fans, you know, when he finds the Half-Blood Prince's, I'm probably getting this wrong. Anyway, he finds the recipe book for the spells, and it has the writing in the margins that fixes all the spells. And so suddenly he's amazing at spells because he's using, right, somebody's handwritten notes in the margin to help him because they've already figured it out. And I think like that's sort of the idea here, which is you're leaving yourself that note in the margin. You're leaving yourself some kind of clue. So even when people give handouts or anything, like I take copious notes, which to me are my notes in the margin. So even if I have like a finished product or a finished something, then I want to write about it. So even with like sketches that I do in my sketchbook, I'll often write a lot about the process I used or why I liked it, because I will remember tomorrow or maybe 2 weeks from now, but I won't 2 years from now, and I won't 10 years from now. And I want these books to be useful to me.
Okay.
So one of the reasons I've switched over from using an art journal to a sketchbook, because people often say like, what's the difference? And I think sometimes there's not a huge difference for a lot. For me, there is. For me, my art journal was always a place to like play and explore, yes, but everything I wrote about was just diary entries.
Okay.
I never like, and it wasn't really directed practice. It was like practice, and it was fun, and I learned a lot, and I think art journals are fantastic, and I still do mine occasionally. But I have found since I've started a really regular sketchbook practice that the sketchbook is such good a space for learning that I just can't give it up right now. I just get so much back from those notes in the margin.
You don't have to.
I don't have to give it up. So there. So yeah, I really am a huge fan of it. So if you wanted to start a directed practice, how would you start it? What a good question. Thanks for asking, Mom. So if you wanted to start it, what I would say is think about a goal you have. Let's go back to the marathon metaphor. Whatever that goal is, I want to understand.
By the way, we are the two least likely people
to run a marathon. It's true. I want to, understand the color wheel, or I want to, and then it's the old joke about eating an elephant bite, 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 break it down. What are the steps you're going to have to take? This is something I do with my coaching clients all the time, and you're getting it for free, which is we talk about what their goal is, and then we back it down. Well, if you want to do this by January 1st, then how do we figure out, how we're going to do it? And then are you aware that this means you're going to have to create two pieces of art every day from now until then? And then most people are like, oh, I didn't realize that. I was like, okay, well then let's set a different goal, or
That's
let's
like
change the timeline.
I was just thinking of construction because my house is currently a morass of construction. That's the whole thing. I mean, you have to get a permit, but before that, you have to get an architect to draw up a design, and then you do the steps, and how long is it going to take for this to get delivered? It's going to take twice as long as you thought. And how much is going to cost? It's going to take 4 times as much as you thought. I mean, everything requires a certain degree of mental organization for you to do it.
Well, it's also like if I told you for your construction budget, you need to have some wiggle room, a contingency fund, because stuff happens, right? Don't plan it out to the dollar. Like, understand that. Everybody would be like, Duh, contingency fund. But if I tell you about your art goal, you have to have some sort of contingency fund. And usually that's a fund of time in which you're not so full throttle that if you get sick, if your child gets sick, if your parent gets sick, if your partner gets sick, if your house burns down, if you get busy at work, if you whatever happens, that you suddenly your project's completely derailed and there's no way to rescue it. So it's like, how can you build in those pockets of what is actually able? Like, one of the things I will say to coaching clients, sometimes I'll say, like, realistically, this is not I'm here to impress you. I think a personal trainer would say the same thing, right? How many days a week are you going to do this? And for how long are you going to do it? If you say to me, I only want to do this twice a week and I'm going to spend an hour on it, that's fine. I can work with that. But if you tell me you're going to do 5 days a week, 6 hours a day, we will make a plan based on that. And then when you don't do it, it will completely fall off the rails and you'll feel like a failure, when actually you just need to be realistic with yourself about how much time you're willing to give to it. And I think a lot of us want to feel like, I'm all in this, because, we're in this sort of immersion culture in which I think the most popular like social media feeds are ones that are solely dedicated to a single idea for endless hours, right? Partially because I think we admire people's tenacity and sticking to it.
Well, also, I know what I'm going to get. If I want to see eyebrows, I'll go to the eyebrows.
The eyebrow lady. Exactly. I have 2 eyebrows, in case you're wondering. You also have 2.
Plan.
Good job. So I think that you just have to remember that you can just do something for a little bit. You can just do something for a little bit. I do think that a regular art practice is more important than than like a bingey art practice. So if you are like, I'm going to spend 2 hours every week, 1 hour on Mondays and 1 hour on Thursdays, and I'm going to do this art practice, I would say bravo. If you're like, I'm just going to do it whenever and I have some time, I'm going to be like, well, that's where we get into a little bit of a problem, right? It's even if you do 6 hours one day and then no hours for 2 weeks, it's sort of not as good as having the regular practice, right? You want that sinus rhythm of your heart in your heart practice.
Well, actually, they say that the reinforcement that you get from doing it regularly helps you learn.
And also just the fact that you keep showing up. I think that showing up is a really difficult thing to do for all of us in many aspects of our lives. And so I do think that just the showing up is such the key. I mean, every time I've gone to a yoga class with a like grumpy face and a slouchy, back. And then I finish the yoga class and I'm like, I am a temple of amazing glory, right? So I think the same is true. You just have to get your butt in there, and do it. And then so that the time isn't wasted, think about it in the yoga class. If you're there and the person's like, okay, just do whatever your body feels like. And I'm going to sit here and you're going to sit there and I'll see you later. Like I would nap on the floor, right? I'm probably not getting any better at anything. I mean, maybe I'm chilling out and relaxing and that's great. So the same thing is true when you come in for your hour of practice to do in your sketchbook or in your art space, which is, what's your goal? What are the, just in yoga class where you hold different positions, what are the exercises you're going to do? What are the things you're working towards? In yoga, am I working towards being able to balance I'm better balanced on one side than the other. Most people are. So am I, learning to balance better, on my non-dominant foot. And that's my goal. So I hold those poses longer and I really think about it. And I really, push, and I make that a goal that I'm chasing. And the same thing can be true in your art practice. What is that thing that you want to get better at? And you just keep chasing it, small or big, right? Until you get there and figuring out the ways that you can do it. So maybe while I'm brushing my teeth, I stand on that non-dominant foot.
Oh, that is one of the things that's recommended.
Right. Just to slowly sort of get it in. And it's not really a change. So maybe if you're trying to get better at like colors, maybe like the last thing you do before you fall asleep is you think about like, colors that are interesting to you today and what are some combinations you might think of, so that it's just there as part of your daily life, but at times that you're not actively in the practice. And then you go to your notebook and you write some of this down. And I think that's part of what helps us get
apropos
better.
Of nothing and just totally random. I've often wondered when they say last thing before you go to sleep, how you know it's just before you're going to go to sleep.
Well, for me, it's because the lights are out and I'm lying there. That's the clue. I don't know.
Do you know what I mean?
I know. I know the
could be
gist of what
in
you're
the
saying.
bed, but I could be there for 3 hours. So do I wait until the 3 hours?
Well, maybe it would help you. So this is actually, I know this sounds crazy, but sometimes when I have trouble sleeping, when I have insomnia, the thing that actually helps me is to do some directed practice in my brain.
Okay.
And I have found that when I think about like, what is the art project that I want to do next, or I'm trying to work out the technical whatever of some sort of art project, or I start thinking through a list of supplies that, for whatever, I fall asleep pretty quickly. And it almost always kicks me. I know not everybody's the same way, but it's somehow, I think because making art is a pleasure thing for me and is not necessarily the business of art, which to be completely frank is what I spend 79% of my day doing, is the business of art, not actually the making of the art. And so I think because the making of the art is the pleasure center for me, it's like, it puts me in a good brain space to fall asleep.
It also may call on a different part of your brain.
Yeah.
So that, the non-analytical, the right-brained part, whatever you want to call it. And so you're ready to sleep because you aren't doing the very specific, you're not running the statistics.
Yeah, and it's de-stressing to me because I think like I worry about my business and I worry about the choices I'm making and I worry about if I've gotten everything done and I worry and I worry and I worry and I worry, but I'm not worried about making art. I just want to do it. So I think that that's relaxing. Okay, so we're probably at a good point to wrap up unless you have any other thoughts or advice for people.
I have no thoughts.
That's a lie.
I'm a blank slate.
If I ever heard a lie, that would be
I'm
one.
an empty vessel. Fill me.
Okay. So a couple things to know about. Monthly membership is here. Obviously, there are 3 different tiers. You can be a member, a maker, or a super learner. There's all sorts of exciting perks at every level. The Artful Holiday class is still available to purchase if you want. It's packed with tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of techniques. I kept lamenting to Mom, I probably should have made it a year-long class. It's got just too much content in it.
I also think people got deceived by the Artful Holiday and they thought they would be making Christmas decorations or something, and it's a technique class, not a project class.
Well, it is a project class, but it's not all making like tampon fairies and stuff. Not that there's anything wrong with that, And then Design Bootcamp is coming up in 2023. There are only 2 spots left in the daytime one, and the nighttime class has some more space. So if you're interested in if you're interested in getting better, which is what we've been talking about today, right? Because Design Bootcamp is an opportunity to grow. If you're not getting the results you want, if you want to refine your personal style, if you don't know how to tell when your work is done, if you struggle with decision-making during the art process, if you're looking for an art mentor, if you're seeking camaraderie from other artists, if you want to understand the structure of artwork, the secret language of artists, any of that, if you're ready to work really, really hard, then Design Bootcamp is for you. And I'll say that the second round of Design Bootcamp, or the second level, I guess, of Design Bootcamp is also starting up in 2 weeks for people who've been through Bootcamp level 1. And in that one, we really do focus a lot more on a sketchbook practice and that kind of stuff. But I would say the feedback I always get from people on this class is that it's life-changing. It completely and totally obliterates any idea that you had before about what an art practice is as well. And that it just allows you to make the art that you want. And don't we all want that? Okay, so you can't find Mom anywhere online because privacy, as we discussed before, but you can find me at juliebalzer.com or on Instagram as Balzer Designs. If you'd like to take a class with me or sign up for private coaching, I'd love to hear from you. And if you'd like to help the show, you can leave a review, mention us on social media, tell your next door neighbor, whatever it is. All of those things help other people find the show. If you're watching this video on YouTube, I hope you'll give us a thumbs up and subscribe. And thanks so much for listening and subscribing. We'll see you the next time on the Adventures in Arting podcast.